Hey guys, Pastor Ryan here, and tonight as we continue our study through Pastor J.D. Greer's book, Above All, we're focusing in on the topic of gospel grace. And so we're just going to dig right into it, but I want you to imagine with me for a second. Have you ever had a uncomfortable conversation with someone? I mean, have you ever had to sit through an awkward dinner table? Right? Imagine with me right now that you're eating dinner with a person who you know, this person, they stand against everything you believe in. Right? And it's not just that, but it's not just that they believe you're wrong, but they believe that what you believe is destructive. Not just for you, but destructive for everyone around you. They believe that you're backwards, you're ignorant, you're a bigot, and you're an embarrassment. And not only do they believe these things, they've told you them. I mean, to your face, privately, they've told you these things, and then on top of that, they've publicly condemned you through the news. But you're having dinner with them. You're sitting down with them across the table, with your children there, allowing them to continue telling you these hateful things, not just once, but regularly. Does that sound fun? Does that really sound like a dinner party you want an invitation to? This was the story of Rosaria Butterfield. Rosaria was a lesbian in a committed relationship with her partner who she was living with at the time. She was a committed LGBTQ activist, and she co-authored the first domestic partnership policy at Syracuse University. If there was anyone anti-Christian, she was. If there was anyone Christians did not want at their dinner table, she was. And yet, a local pastor and his wife continually invited her over for dinner, and Rosaria went. She was doing research. She wanted to prove from the inside how bad Christians are for society. I mean, she wanted to show that they weren't just anti-intellectual, but they were anti-American. They were anti-freedom. But what she found in this loving Christian couple and their family, she wasn't expecting. As much as she was prepared to refute every single argument they might make, she was not prepared for the kindness and the compassion that they showed her. She states that she was overwhelmed by the love and the genuineness that this couple showed towards her. And so she kept going back to them. Not just once, not just twice, but for 2 years. And through her relationship with this family, Rosaria experienced the love of Christ in the gospel. It's through what she describes it as radical hospitality and kindness that she saw the beauty of God. I wonder, what do people see in your life? Because the sad part is that for many Christians, for many of us today, kindness and grace are often the last words people would use to describe us. And Pastor J.D., he shares about a time he was invited to UNC Chapel Hill to debate a local Muslim imam named Abdullah. He says that the debate went well, and people were actually probably disappointed because there wasn't as much drama as they would have wanted. But the reason the debate went well wasn't because they both agreed on the same things. Right? It wasn't like they just both said, oh yeah, sure, whatever, that's great, we're all going to get along, we all believe. No, they both shared their views, and they both sincerely believed and communicated that they thought the other was mistaken. However, despite their sincere disagreements, they still respected one another. In fact, JD says that this event actually led and developed into a multi-year friendship between him and Abdullah. And so they had this debate, and then shortly afterwards, a local university, another liberal Christian university, saw the success of the debate, and so they decided they wanted to have their own. And so they invited Abdullah to come to their university to have another debate, but they didn't want Pastor J.D. representing their kind of Christianity. And so they had one of their own religion professors debate him. And afterward, J.D. says that Abdullah called him right after the debate because he needed help to process things. And so when J.D. asked him how the debate went, Abdullah said, "Not good. I think I'm more Christian than that professor is." Well, J.D. said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, well, every time the Bible came up, he seemed embarrassed. And he spent more time explaining why it doesn't mean what it plainly says. Then Abdullah said this: "It seems to me that your Christian world faces a dilemma. On the one hand are people who believe the Bible, and on the news at least, this group seems to have an uncharitable spirit toward Muslims. On the other hand, we see Christians like this professor who don't believe the Bible, yet they have a charitable spirit toward us. Your Christian world seems like these are the only two alternatives. Either one, believe the Bible and be mean, or two, deny the Bible and be loving. Why can't Christians both believe the Bible and be loving?" Abdullah isn't wrong. The majority of people in our culture would probably, to our shame, not describe the church as loving. And I think we as believers struggle with the question, what does a loving conversation look like? Right? For instance, some people believe that to be loving towards others, we just have to compromise. Right? We should hold our beliefs less strongly, less dogmatically. We should be more open-minded. That's what some Christians believe is loving. Right? The more we act like we all believe the same things, the more we all get along, right? But that's not a loving dialogue, that's delusion. The question we must wrestle with is the same question Abdullah raised. Why can't we both believe the Bible and be loving? Is it possible to believe in truth passionately and to accept others with opposing beliefs with grace? When we look at the life of Jesus, he epitomized, as John 1:14 says, being full of grace and truth. Jesus spoke with such clarity that his enemies could not rest until they killed him. Yet he exuded so much grace that many of those who disagreed with him still couldn't resist being around him. This made Jesus both simultaneously intolerable and irresistible. And what people experienced through Jesus is exactly what Rosaria Butterfield experienced through her friendship with that loving couple. Kindness that's irresistible, grace that's overwhelming, truth that's constant. That is how we're supposed to live. If we fail to live in either grace or truth, we're out of step with Jesus. Truth without grace is fundamentalism. It's whacking people on the head with the Bible, but grace without truth is sentimentality. It's just an attempt to hug people to heaven. So how do we fix it? Well, let's start by looking at probably the most popular but most misunderstood Bible passage and teaching of Jesus today. Matthew 7:1. Judge not. Right? Now there's more to that verse, right? But most people only know the beginning. That's because that's about all they care about. People love judge not because it sounds like a handy way of saying, you can't tell me I'm wrong. You can't tell me what to do. It's the non-Christian's best weapon to get a Christian off their back. You can't argue with the Bible, right? This phrase, judge not, seems really to embody two basic assumptions that our culture makes. One, that religion is private, and two, that morality is relative. And the problem is that Jesus, Jesus, the one who's speaking in Matthew 7:1, the one who said, "Judge not," Jesus never held to either of those assumptions. Jesus frequently expressed his opinions on morality to other people. Jesus made public judgments, some of them quite shocking. He told some people their works were evil, and he told another group of people that they were wrong because they neither knew the scriptures nor the power of God. So Jesus couldn't have meant in Matthew 7:1 that we're supposed to keep our ideas about religion and morality to ourselves, because he surely didn't. So what is he saying? And this is the key. This is what we have to get here. When Jesus denounced judging, "Judge not," he wasn't telling us to stop assessing other people's opinions or behaviors. Instead, he was telling us to avoid a graceless, critical posture towards those people. He was rejecting an attitude that writes people off, that tells them the truth and pushes them away. That's the response that Rosaria Butterfield was expecting. What we have to understand is that speaking a hard truth isn't the same as speaking condemnation. We aren't judging someone when we tell them a hard truth. Whether or not you judge someone is determined by what you do after you tell them truth. Judging is when you go beyond speaking a hard truth. You go from saying, "This is wrong," to, "I don't want you around anymore." So how do we fix that? How do we judge not? It starts by creating a culture that is saturated in gospel grace. But how do you know if you're in a culture of judgment or gospel grace? Well, let's look at it. I want to give you 7 signs that reveal whether or not you're living in a culture of judgment or gospel grace. And so the first one, you can know you're living in a culture of judgment when you are more enraged at someone else's sin than your own. And I can't think of any more perfect time than now as we think of the murder of George Floyd and we think about all these events taking place throughout our country and people committing arson and burning down buildings and vandalism and looting. We know that we've entered into a culture of judgment when we are more enraged at other people's sins than our own. The truth is that if you've been transformed by the gospel, your primary dismay should not be with other people's sin. It should be with the sin in your own heart. We have to confront others in their sin, but always while we're painfully aware of our own sin. In fact, if you keep reading Matthew 7, we're told that when we do confront our brother and sister, to take a speck out of their eye, that we make sure we do it having first removed the log out of our own eye. You can approach someone and you can confront someone about a particular issue, but only if you are aware that what you've got going on is a whole lot worse. The moment we find more offense in other people's sin than our own, the more we have strayed from the realm of grace. Secondly, you can know you're in a culture of judgment when we refuse to forgive, or when we forgive but we refuse to forget. To refuse to forgive someone is to be intentionally ignorant of the enormous unpayable debt that God has forgiven you from. And to forgive but not forget is really another way of saying, I'm going to say that I forgive you so that I feel better, but I'm going to show you that I really haven't forgiven you by reminding you all the time of how much you still owe me because of what you did. That's not forgiveness at all. Forgiveness means absorbing the debt and offering only love and goodness in return. no strings attached. Third, you can know you're in a culture of judgment when you cut off and you push away those who disagree with you. This, in fact, is the essence of judging. When someone doesn't fit your standard of behavior or belief, you refuse to reward them with your love or your presence. You cut them off. You basically say, because we disagree on this, we can't be friends. And you send them away. Think about it. What is the ultimate statement of judgment? It's God in the last days saying, "Depart from me, you workers of iniquity." But that's God. As Christians, we don't get to say that to anyone because we're not given the role of judge. Jesus never said that to anyone on earth. He predicted that one day in heaven he would say that. But while he was on earth, what did he do? He called Judas, the man who betrayed him, friend. So what do? We do what Jesus did. We speak truth and then we offer kindness and love. And the point is that we must love the person we disagree with more than we love their agreement with us on that issue. Again, this doesn't mean that we compromise or we water down our beliefs, but it does mean that we stay committed to and in relationship with people who passionately disagree with us. Fourth, you can know you're in a culture of judgment when you gossip. Gossip is judging because you condemn the person that you are talking about. Instead of gospel confrontation, which is where we lovingly and graciously invite someone towards better living, gossip dismissively writes them off. And what makes gossip so dangerous is that we're judging someone without them even knowing that we're judging them. We are not even offering them a chance to change. It's as if we don't even think that that person could change, or that they're not worth the relational discomfort it would cost us in order to make them or bring about change. Gossip labels the one you're talking about as irredeemable and worthy of scorn and contempt. It writes people off without even them knowing it. Fifth, you can know you're in a culture of judgment when you refuse to correct someone's position. Ironically, not telling people that they're wrong is a way of judging them. As a Christian, when you refuse to correct someone, it's generally for one of two reasons. Either one, you don't believe the Bible is true what it says, or two, you don't believe the other person can actually change. Now, I know there's a time to speak and a time to be silent, but generally, the majority of us are far often way more silent than we should be. And what happens is that if you don't confront someone, if you believe, again, you're either believing that the Bible is not true in what it says, or that the person you're talking to can't change. And neither of those things are honoring to God. Neither of those beliefs are true. As with the gossip, when you assume that the other person can't or won't change, you're judging them and you're condemning them from the start. You're leaving them in their sin without ever giving them the opportunity to receive grace. 6, you can know you're in a culture of judgment when you refuse to receive criticism. Have you ever asked yourself why you hate criticism so much? Isn't it because we hate to admit that we have faults? We generally see ourselves as righteous judge much more than we see ourselves as sinner in need of grace. But if you understand the gospel, your faults shouldn't surprise you. When others point out your sin, you should be able to say, "I know, right? In fact, I'm way more sinful than you even know. But praise God that nothing I ever could do or nothing that could ever be revealed about me is not already covered by the blood of Jesus." And when you live in that kind of gospel grace, that kind of understanding of your own condition, it changes the way that you point out sin in others. 7th, You can know you're living in a culture of judgment when you write off someone as hopeless. Again, we talked about this before, but writing off someone as hopeless means that you believe they're past saving. You've declared judgment on them, but Paul said that the gospel was the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes. It's not your place to amend that. If you're not dead, God's not done. If they're not dead, there's still hope. So in contrast to living in a culture of judgment, what we need to establish is a culture of gospel grace. But that goes beyond just speaking graciously to people. We have to also live graciously amongst people. If you haven't noticed, Christians in America are becoming less and less popular, and it's my belief that that's only going to continue to increase down the road. Recent studies show that the average American is more comfortable talking to an IRS agent than they are to an evangelical Christian. That's not a good thing. And so some Christians, because of this dislike and this animosity towards Christianity, they're ready to go to war. They're like, you know what, it's time. We're going to show everybody who the truly righteous ones are. Desperate times call for desperate measures, right? Who has time to be civil and kind when you're under attack? And so these Christians, they're fighting back and they're lashing out against people who are attacking them. But we don't look to our culture for our response. We look to Jesus. What did Jesus do? 1 Peter 2:23 says that Jesus, when he was reviled, did not revile in return. Jesus did not conquer sin by fighting sinners. He conquered sin by dying because of it and rising from the dead to defeat it. And on the other side of his death, do you know what there was? The power of his resurrection. And so Jesus offers the same pattern to us. Extending gospel grace means sometimes you might feel scorned and defeated in public. Sometimes you'll be misunderstood. You might feel abandoned. Jesus experienced all those things as well. But remember that the way of the cross leads to resurrection power. Now more than ever, we must seek to follow Jesus' example and live out the grace and truth that he's given us. We have to speak the truth of Christ. We have to. We can't compromise on truth. We have to speak the truth, but we must also do it in the spirit of Christ. And if we don't speak the truth, or if we don't speak the truth in the same spirit of which the truth was given to us, then we lie about who God is. The grace and truth of God must spill out of the church doors into our communities. As Christians, we ought to be known for our excessive love toward our neighbors and the nations. Right? There was a time in church history when the grace of Christians was overwhelmingly evident to the surrounding community. And guess what? Christians had a pretty good witness then. They had a pretty good testimony. In the 4th century, the Roman Emperor Julian actually complained about the kindness of Christians. He said, "How can we stop the growth of these wretched Galileans? They take care not only of their own poor, but ours as well." What if that was the complaint our culture had against us? Wouldn't it be nice for the world to hate us for loving them too well? We need to get back to a culture of radical gospel grace. But this doesn't mean that we lose the truth. See, without correct doctrine, our culture of grace will be weak. But without the culture of grace, our doctrine will seem pointless. Without the correct doctrine, our culture of grace is going to be weak. But without that culture of grace, that doctrine is going to seem real pointless. However, gospel grace, we want it to spill out into the streets. We want it to influence our communities, but it can't spill out into the streets if it's not first displayed in the church. Jesus said that the world would know we are His by the way we love one another. Not first by the way we love the world, but how we love each other. How can we hope to show love to the world if we're not showing love to our own church family? I know none of y'all students have Facebook, but do you know how many Christians talk to one another? Do you know how Christians talk to one another on there? Do you think it's loving? Do you think it's full of grace and truth? Let me tell you something. It's not. I don't know, what are you guys on? You're on TikTok, Instagram, whatever it is. What do you guys see on there? The truth is that if we believe the gospel, then we should look like the gospel. And that starts with how we relate to our own brothers and sisters in Christ. So let me give you 5 quick principles here that will help you to walk in gospel grace in your interactions with other people, especially with other believers in church, and especially when you have disagreements. And the first thing I say is this: give the benefit of the doubt. Give them the benefit of a doubt. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, says that when conflict arises, assume 2 things about your coworkers. 1, they're smart, and 2, they have good intentions. He says if we're able to return back to these 2 convictions often, 90% of conflict will disappear. But these aren't natural responses, are they? Right? Instead of assuming people are smart and good, we generally assume they're dumb and evil. But the gospel counsels us to start by assuming the opposite. Love means bearing all things, believing all things. That means starting with the assumption of the benefit of the doubt. Second, assume the best about others. This goes hand in hand with the first one. Give people the benefit of the doubt, but then assume the best about them. What this means is that we accept the best possible narrative about someone and their motives until we know otherwise. When there are gaps in our knowledge, we fill in the gaps with trust. Right? If I invite you to lunch and you're supposed to meet me at noon, you're supposed to meet me at 12 o'clock, but you don't show up until 12:30, I could think a lot of things. I could think, oh, you don't respect me. You don't value my time. You're lazy. You're undisciplined. Right? I could think a lot of thoughts, but assuming the best thinks differently. Maybe there was traffic. Maybe something unexpected happened. This doesn't mean that we're blind. It doesn't mean that we walk around with rose-colored glasses. But if this is our attitude, if we have an attitude of trust, then we'll approach people with questions rather than accusations. We will make the assumption that there is some information that we don't have, and as a result, our tone will change. We'll sound more like, "You aren't usually like this. Is something going on?" Assume the best. Third, promote a culture of change. And the important word here is culture. Right? That means that we interact with the world around us. And what they remember about us should not just be our firm convictions on truth, but it should also be the warm way we embraced and accepted them. Why wouldn't you want the thing people most remember about us not just to be the truth we told them, but also the way we loved them? Why shouldn't grace characterize all of our interactions? And what you'll see if you begin to live this out is that grace begets grace. Grace brings forth more grace. I love this Mindy Kaling, who plays Kelly in the show The Office, one of the greatest shows of all time. She wrote a book about her time on the cast there. And in her book, she talks about how the entire cast always tried to get Steve Carell, who plays Michael Scott, they always tried to get him to badmouth or trash talk other people on the set or just anyone famous in general. And she remembers just being upset that they could never get him to do it. She said that Steve just sort of exuded a kind of niceness that was so kind and gentle that it was scary. And she said time after time they would try to get Steve to badmouth someone, but he would just smile and then politely excuse himself. He never joined in. And what we see is that Steve's actions promoted a culture of grace that impacted the morale of the cast and their chemistry on camera, and then thus the quality of the show, making it one of the most successful shows of all time. As a gospel believer, you should think of yourself as an agent whose mission is to promote grace in every interaction. So for instance, when you hear a believer trashing another believer, don't let it go. Encourage them to assume the best, to give the benefit of the doubt, to fill in the gaps with trust. 4, push for direct and honest dialogue. Don't go talking about people. Talk to people. If people come to you talking about something someone else has done or something someone else has said, ask them if they've talked to that person. Confrontation is necessary, but it has to be done in the right way. It has to be done directly, with an open Bible, with open ears, and a humble heart. And if we figured out how to do this right, if we got this right, most of our relational conflicts would disappear. 5th, seek to outdo one another in showing grace. Proverbs 19:11 says that it is a person's glory to overlook an offense. Paul says in Romans 12:10 to outdo one another in showing honor. Paul here is encouraging good, healthy gospel competition in showing grace to others. As we said earlier, there will be times to confront one another about certain things, right? But there are also times to let things go. Wisdom is found in knowing when it's time for which. For some people, fear of man may prevent them from confronting someone when they should. For others, arrogance may push them to confront someone when they should remain silent. Sometimes the best motivator in spurring people to be better is to extend them grace. Again, think of how God changed us. He showed us grace. We can often compel people to good works faster by giving them grace that they don't deserve than judgment that they do. So we can't just have truth, and we can't just have grace. We must walk in both grace and truth if we desire to live as Christ in our community. That's the kind of life that reaches people. That's the kind of life that reaches a person like Rosaria Butterfield. That's the kind of life that God uses for His kingdom. Walk and live in radical grace. I love you guys. I'm praying for you. I can't wait to see you this Wednesday, June 3rd at the church. Y'all take care. God bless.